She woke before the sun, her boots hitting the dirt in quiet rhythm as she crossed the field toward the range, carrying tape, staples, and a roll of fresh paper. Her job was simple: patch the targets, clear the debris, stay out of the way. She had done it for weeks without complaint, unnoticed by most, a silent part of the background, while others trained, shouted, fired, moved like they were born for it. They wore gear that gleamed in the light, faces focused, jaws set, voices sharp and confidential moved quietly between them, her eyes always watching, never lingering too long. She had grown used to being invisible. It was easier that way, easier to not be noticed, easier to not be judged. That morning was no different, or so she thought. The air was crisp, the sky still streaked with gray when she set up the first round of targets. The crack of gunfire started early, echoing across the valley as steel rang and paper ripped, but she kept her head down, stapling, patching, walking the line in the cold shadow of men built for war. She was just resetting lane 5 when it happened, the voice sharp from behind. Hey, you with the tapish turned slowly, unsure if she was in trouble, unsure if she had stepped where she should not, but the voice was not angry, it was curious, and when she looked up, the man standing there were the patches and scars of experience. A Navy SEAL, tall, quiet, unreadably. Ever shoot one of these? He asked, holding out his rifle like it was nothing, like it was just another tool. She shook her head, not trusting her voice, not trusting the moment, smiled, not mocking, but calm, patient, and extended the weapon again. Go ahead, he said, just try. She stared at it, her hands frozen halfway between acceptance and fear. Unsure if this was real, if this was a joke or a test, she took it slowly, feeling the weight settle into her palms, the cold metal firm and balanced, heavier than she imagined. The others noticed, eyes turning, heads tilting as she stepped forward, unsure. Her boots pressed into the earth, and the rifle lifted awkward in her arms until she adjusted, shifted, found the stance she had seen 100 times. From the corner of her eye, her breath caught her finger, hesitated. The target swayed slightly in the morning wind, and she remembered to breathish, pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the stillness, and the world paused around her, the recoil jolting her shoulder, but she held on, eyes locked forward, afraid to blink, afraid to look. Then a voice from the side, calm and loud, center mass clean. Hith SEAL nodded once, not surprised, not shocked, just satisfied, and said again. She stood there, unsure of what to do next, the rifle still warm in her hands, her heart pounding in her chest like it might give her away. She looked around, waiting for someone to laugh, to take the gun back and send her off, but no one moved, no one spoke. The silence stretched as the others processed what they had just seen. SEAL beside her gave a small nod, the kind you give when something lines up exactly the way you expected it. He reached out and took the rifle back, checking the chamber without a word before handing it back to her again, this time slower, more deliberate, as if to say it was not an exigency. Looked at the weapon, then at him, unsure if this was permission or challenge or both, but she took it again and stepped forward. The second shot came easier, not because she was confident, but because she was still too stunned to overthink it. She had watched enough from the sidelines to know what the form looked like, where the cheek met the stock, how to breathe through the noise and find that brief, perfect pause. Another hit. This time a few heads turned, some whispered, a few smirked. But no one said a word aloud, and she felt it, the shift, the way the space around her changed, as if she had stepped through some invisible gate into a place not meant for her, but no longer off limits. The SEAL said nothing, just waved her forward again and adjusted the settings on the scope before stepping back, letting her stand alone in front of the target. Lanesha stared through the scope, feeling the weight of every eye on her now, some curious, some doubtful, some quietly impressed. She fired again and again, and with each shot the invisible line between her and them began to blur. Later, after the session ended, while she was picking up casings and taping new targets, a younger trainee walked over and asked how long she had been shooting. She said this was her first time, and his eyebrows raised in disbelief, but he nodded and said, maybe you were meant for this. Did not know what she was meant for, only that something had started, something real. That night she could not sleep. The sound of the rifle, the steady pull of the trigger, the clean impact of metal on target played over in her mind on repeat, not like a dream, but like a memory already branded into who she was. Had walked onto the range that morning with Tape and a staple gun now, she had walked off it with questions burning inside her about where this could lead and why it felt so right. Did not understand it yet, but she knew one thing for sure: she wanted to shoot again. Showed up earlier. The next morning, before the trucks arrived, before the voices filled the air and the steel began to ring across the range, she stood alone at the edge, watching the mist roll over the dirt field, her hands cold and steady as she waited, unsure if yesterday had changed anything, or if it had only been a moment that would fade back into routine. But the SEAL was already there, waiting, standing beside the equipment shed with a second rifle in hand. This one sleeker, heavier, more precise. He handed it to her without a word, like they had already spoken, like everything that needed saying had passed through the silence of the shots she had forwarded. You learn distance, he said, walking toward the far end of the field where taller targets stood, painted white against the hillside, marked with numbers she had never needed to know until who showed her how to read the wind, how to calculate drop, how to adjust her stance for elevation, and how to read the subtle shifts in the field that most people ignored. She listened with focus, not asking questions, just watching, absorbing, mirroring each movement until the rifle no longer felt like a foreign object but an extension of thought, a part of her that had always been there waiting to be recognized. Others started to arrive one by one, their conversations quiet as they saw her already at the line, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed on a target almost too far to see. Some laughed under their breath, some just watched. Thesiel called the distance 900 meters, took a deep breath, aligned her body, remembered his words about breath and trigger and patience, and when she fired, the shot traveled long and silent like a whisper through the air until the distant clang of metal echoed back across the field. First height, when the doubters paused, this Timothy moved to the next target, a little further, a little higher, and she adjusted without being told, her eyes sharper than before, her hands more certain. She missed once, then again, but on the third shot the steel rang out clean. Progress, not perfection, the SEAL said. She nodded, sweat on her brow, heart steady, mind locked in. By the end of the session her body ached, her arms sore, her shoulder bruised, but inside her something else had taken root, something fierce and steady that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with will. Thesiel handed her a water bottle and said, "You're going to need rest. You'll be back here tomorrow same time, but it gets harder." Nosh smiled, not because she felt ready, but because she knew she would come back. She had tasted something real out there on the range, something that had waited quietly inside her for years, and now that it had been awakened, it refused to go back to sleep. The next morning was different, the air thicker, the sky darker, clouds rolling low as if warning her that this day would not be like the others. She arrived at the range before anyone else, rifle slung across her shoulder, gear packed with more care than usual, her hands calm but her mind sharp. She knew he would push her today, and she was ready, or at least she thought she was, until he handed her a helmet and a vest and told her to follow him beyond the main field, past the familiar lanes into the wooded section of the range where real training happened, where shots were not just about accuracy but about survival. "Today we simulate pressure," he said, and she nodded, even though she had no real idea what he meant until the crack of a rifle behind her made her flinch and duck, instinct kicking in as 3 more shots fired in sequence, not at her but near her, close enough to feel. "Keep moving," he shouted from somewhere behind her. She did her best to stay focused, moving low through the brush, scanning for the target. He had described a metal plate hidden somewhere between the trees. 30 seconds to find it and hit it before the next round of fire. Her heart pounded harder than it ever had, even more than the first time she fired a shot. Weeks Agatha's was different. This was Alavesh. Dropped to her stomach, spotted the faint outline of the target through a break in the trees, raised the rifle, steadied her breath, and Fared's ping of metal confirmed the hit, but there was no time to celebrate. Move again, came the next command. She ran, crouched, dropped, adjusted, aimed, fired again. The drill repeated over and over through mud, leaves, sweat, and bruises until the sun was high and her legs shook from the effort. When they finally stopped, she collapsed beside a stump and looked up at the SEAL, who stood over her, arms crossed, nodding slowly. "You held your own," he said. "Most don't the first time out." She wiped the sweat from her face, her arms trembling, her shirt clinging to her back soaked through, but there was something else under all the exhaustion. Pride, not because she had been perfect, but because she had kept going. As they walked back to the main range, the others were waiting, some clapping her on the back, others silent but respectful, and she realized something had shifted again, not just in how they saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer just someone learning to shoot, she was now someone who could perform under pressure, someone who could be counted on when it Mata read that night. As she cleaned her rifle, hands still aching, she did not feel like an outsider anymore. She felt like part of something bigger, and for the first time since it all began, she allowed herself to believe she truly belonged. The days began to blur into one another. Long hours on the range, long walks back to the barracks, sore muscles, dirt under her nails. The rhythm of breathing, aiming, firing, reloading, moving again became as familiar as her own name, and yet each morning still felt new, as if she was rewriting the story every time she picked up that rifle. Some of the others had started training alongside her, not out of pity, not out of duty, but out of curiosity, out of respect. They watched how she moved, how she handled the pressure, how she listened more than she spoke, and how she never asked for favors or praise. She had begun to earn something that could not be demanded and could never be faked. That afternoon, the SEAL walked her out to a different part of the range where a single steel silhouette stood far beyond anything she had tried before. The air was still, the light fading, and he said nothing as he handed her a new rifle. This one different, longer, heavier, custom optics. You only get one shot, he said, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact. She stepped forward, took her position, lined up her scope, and studied. The wind. There was a long silence, no one else around, just the distant hum of wind through dry grass and the steady rhythm of her breath. She squeezed the trigger slowly, like he taught her, not thinking about anything else, not the distance, not the pressure, not the way this moment might define what came next. Crack rang out, and a full 2 seconds passed before the metallic echo returned. A clean hit dead center. Did not speak, he only nodded once and then turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with the sound still ringing in her ears. That night she was pulled aside by one of the senior instructors, not the SEAL, but someone higher, someone who had been watching quietly for weeks. He asked her questions, not about marksmanship, but about commitment, about discipline, about her reasons for showing up early and staying. Latesh answered honestly, saying she had never planned for this, had never seen herself behind a rifle, let alone excelling with one, but that something had changed the moment she pulled that first trigger. He listened, nodded, then handed her a folded piece of paper with a set of coordinates and a date. Show up here if you are serious, he said. No promises, just a door, and whether or not she walked through it would be up to her. That night she sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the paper. Long after lights out, Shay had been just a helper, once invisible to the people who now stood beside her in silence and respect. No, she was standing at the edge of something more, a line in the dust, and on the other side of it, a future she had never imagined. Morning she arrived at the coordinates was colder than usual, a sharp wind cutting across the open valley where a small group stood waiting, silent, with no greetings, no introductions, only the sound of boots on gravel and the distant hum of a generator. As she stepped out of the transport, every eye turned toward her, but no one said a word. She carried the rifle strapped to her back, the same one she had used to hit that impossible shot, the same one that now felt like part of her body. She had cleaned it, oiled it, memorized every scratch on its frame. It had become more than a weapon. It had become the proof of everything she had fought for. One of the instructors motioned for her to step forward, a clipboard in his hand, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He read her name and number, then looked up and said, "You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not quit unless we carry you out. Do you understand?" She nodded once and without hesitation stepped into the circle where the rest of them stood. All of them older, stronger, more experienced, some with eyes that had clearly seen things she could not yet imagine. Training was not like anything she had done before. It was brutal, it was relentless, it pushed every part of her body and mind to the breaking point, and then beyond it. They ran drills until her lungs burned. They crawled through mud and gravel, under barbed wire, through freezing water, over cracked rock and shattered nerves, failed more than once, missed shots, made mistakes. collapsed from exhaustion, but she always got back up, always reset the rifle, always found her mark when it counted. The instructors watched with hard eyes, but she saw something change in them too, the way they stopped questioning her presence, the way they began to rely on her in team exercises, the way she was no longer just the one who surprised them, but the one who kept showing up. Weeks passed, her body hardened, her mind sharpened, and by the end of it all, when they stood together in formation, sweat and dirt and silence clinging to them, she was still there, not just standing, but standing tall. Thesiel was there to watching from the edge of the crowd, the one who had first handed her the rifle, who had seen something in her when she had been nothing more than a shadow moving between targets. She gave no speech, said no words, only nodded again, that same nod that had started everything, and it was enough. She had crossed the line that few ever reach, and fewer still endure. No longer just the girl who fixed targets, no longer a surprise, no longer a question. She was now the answer, and as the sun rose over the range, casting gold across the steel and earth, she tightened the strap on her rifle and walked forward into a future she had earned, one round, one step, one impossible shot at a time.